Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we preview the Detroit Lions Thursday night matchup with the Green Bay Packers. In addition to our usual game preview, we hear from a reporter who covers the Packers regularly. We'll talk about met expectations so far on the season, as well as areas of success and concerns for Green Bay. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
This is Corey Schlesinger, and you are listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
For each division rival game this year, we're having a guest who covers the team regularly. We're going to start the show by finding a little bit more out about the Packers. And to do that, I'm joined today by Lauren Helmbrecht, sports reporter for the CBS affiliate WFRV TV out of Green Bay, Wisconsin. You can find her work at wearegreenbay.com. Lauren has also worked at NFL Films, pitched story ideas for HBO's Hard Knocks, and covers the Green Bay Packers on a regular basis. Lauren, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I feel like we just chatted preseason and now we're already going into week 4. It's crazy how quick the season picks up.
Yeah, it was only just a few weeks ago we talked about expectations for the teams coming in, and now we actually have something to use as a measuring stick. It's only 3 weeks, but it's a little something. So let's get everybody caught up on what the Packers have done. They won their first game easily against the Bears. Then they had back-to-back games with 1-point differences, losing to Atlanta by 1, and then the big comeback this past weekend, winning against New Orleans at Lambeau Field. That sets up both the Packers and the Lions at 2-1, heading into a divisional matchup that is for first place. So how's the feeling been around Green Bay to start the season, and how are they feeling, especially after this most recent win over the Saints?
Well, if you had asked me 1 quarter of football ago, I would say things were not feeling very good. The Packers had given up 30 straight points going from the end of the Falcons game when they went in with a 12-point lead toward the end and then lost it, to going into the first 3 quarters of the Saints game when the Packers were outscored 17-0. It was kind of a sense of what's going on here? Where's the disconnect? Why can't the offense get anything going? And bear in mind, there have been injuries, which I know we'll talk about later, but also Jordan Love, and this is still a new era. This is still a young team. Jordan Love is still new at QB1. So I think the 30 unanswered points was looking pretty rough. But in the fourth quarter, for just the second time in this very storied franchise history, the Packers overcome a 17-point fourth quarter deficit to beat the Saints. Jordan Love looks unbelievable. There was a little help with a missed field goal and some defensive pass interference, but his decision-making in the red zone, going for it on fourth down, finding Romeo Doubs, who is really shining in year 2. He looked great in year 1, but really shining in year 2. I mean, there are some pretty crazy things being said over here in Green Bay land about Jordan Love and how good he is. I mean, leading the first 2 weeks in the NFL, he was leading the league in passer rating, which, I mean, it was only 2 weeks, small sample size. He threw his first interception in this Saints game, but to do this kind of comeback, I think people are very excited. I've seen a lot of folks talk about, wow, he's really picked up and learned from Aaron Rodgers. There's a couple plays that people are putting side by side of what Rodgers was doing and Jordan Love was doing. So obviously people are very excited, but I think the challenge of a Lions game on a short week in Lambeau after this up and down of the past week in Green Bay, that'll be another really good test. And I know the first time we talked, I said, maybe don't judge the Packers after one matchup against the Lions. I think it's fair to kind of see how they're doing and building upon what just happened against the Saints.
All right. And going into the season, I don't think that you and I are shocked to see, you're not shocked to see Green Bay being 2-1. I'm not shocked to see the Lions being 2-1. We both might be a little shocked at seeing Minnesota and Chicago at 0-3.
Well, I think Minnesota 0-3 is surprising. And I won't necessarily mince words, but Chicago looks worse than we thought they would look. I mean, it's bad over there. So I think maybe the dysfunction of the Bears is overshadowing the fact that the Vikings are also 0-3.
I think so. The Bears are getting more of the publicity on that, and that's not the good publicity type.
Yeah, exactly.
So we want to talk about this matchup, Green Bay and Detroit. And there's a lot of things we want to break down, but there's an overarching theme we have to get out right away, and that's the injury bug. The Detroit Lions fans know about the injury bug to the Detroit Lions players, but the Green Bay Packers, they're also suffering from the same illness. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Yeah, it bit the Packers hard, that injury bug. So going into the Saints game, the injury report comes out about an hour and a half before kickoff on a noon game. And so we got the list, and the Packers are down their top wide receiver, their top running back, their top quarterback, half of their left side of the offensive line, and then some. So Aaron Jones wasn't playing. Christian Watson wasn't playing. David Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Jair Alexander was added because of a back injury. So the Packers didn't practice on Monday because of the short week. They'll practice again on Tuesday. But on Monday, all those players except for Aaron Jones were listed as would not have practiced. Jones would have been limited. Rashawn Gary would have been limited as well. He's still on a pitch count from recovering from the ACL. But against the Saints, a couple more players were added. Devondre Campbell, who's the defensive kind of brain in that linebacker area making play calls, he was added. And then Zach Tom was a late add. He's also on the left side of the offensive line. He's pretty versatile. When we talked preseason, I mentioned how he could kind of move around. Well, he's also on the injured list. Then Carrington Valentine, who came in to play for Jair because Jair was injured. Well, now Carrington Valentine's also injured. So it's a laundry list. It's not these maybe players that you've never heard of. These are high impact players, high money, high value players. But the fact that the Packers could pull off a win like they did against the Saints without these, adding one or two back, I mean, that would just hopefully build upon what they could do.
All right. That is good information to have because obviously some of those guys you mentioned are household names. Even Detroit Lions fans recognize some of them. The Lions have a laundry list as well. They lost a number of people in the Seattle game. They had more injuries this past week against Atlanta. I will get into those later in the show, folks. But let's start talking about the Green Bay offense. Now, we talked before the season started how this was a very young wide receiving core. And Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, and let's put Luke Musgrave, the tight end, in there because those seem to be the top three contributors so far. Christian Watson's been injured. How has the receiving core with the tight end addition been looking so far?
I'd say there's still a bit of a struggle with the deep ball, just getting connection. And Jordan Love mentioned after the Saints game that there was one pass to Luke Musgrave. He was wide open down the middle, just a miscommunication, misthrow on the Packers 2-point conversion that ultimately was a big swing in the game against the Saints. You could tell that Jaden Reed didn't run the correct route. And so that's why Jordan Love had to throw to Samori Toure because there was just something was drawn up incorrectly and there was some miscommunication. So definitely still a learning curve, definitely still a connection, but the speed is noticed. The speed is a factor, and defenses have to respect the Packers wide receiver speed. I'd also throw Tay Wicks in on that conversation. He was drafted this year as well, and he's got that speed. In the first play of the Falcons game, I mean, he blew out of the water, and a deep ball from Jordan Love, just really fun way to start the game. So speed, like we talked about earlier, and just learning. I'd say those are probably the two biggest factors. And Luke Musgrave is fair to add into that receiver conversation as the number one tight end because he does have the hands and the speed similar to a wide receiver, just obviously with more size.
All right, then let's move to the offensive line and running game. I know David Bakhtiari was out. You mentioned some other injuries. You mentioned how the offensive line really needed to come together this year. And as far as the running game goes, Aaron Jones had just 9 carries in week 1 before getting hurt. A.J. Dillon's been trying to carry the load, but if I'm not mistaken, Jordan Love was actually the leading rusher for the team this past week. So how is the offensive line playing with everything? And what do you know about Aaron Jones, and when do you think he might be back?
So Aaron Jones, like I said, was one of the players who, if on Monday the Packers had practiced, would be limited versus do not practice. I think that he didn't play in the Saints game a bit because of the short week, knowing that if he were able to come back, let's not rush it for week 3 if week 4 is 4 days later. As far as the run game and the offensive line, one thing that people were definitely paying attention to was Patrick Taylor's number of snaps against the Saints. He is on the practice squad, and that was his 3rd elevation. He's a 4-year vet with the Packers, so he's been around as a P squad guy, getting calls up. And Matt LaFleur spoke about using Patrick Taylor versus AJ Dillon on Monday, saying that it was more because of a 2-minute drill. So AJ Dillon is averaging just over 2.5 yards per carry, which is not ideal. And he did have an interesting social media post that I would encourage folks to see if it's still up after the game on Sunday about Kobe Bryant talking about adversity and failure. So I don't know what that means. I'm not going to infer, but I would just say it's noted. Packers offensive line, I mean, the injuries are just astronomical right now when you're talking about David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins. Those are your veterans. I'd say the biggest takeaway too in the Saints game was early penalties, just eating them up, false starts, holds, just eating them alive. So for not having Bakhtiari and Jenkins, if the worst thing you're doing is getting a couple false starts, probably not that bad. Jordan Love's not been beat up in the pocket. So I'd call that a win.
All right. And, going to Jordan Love, you kind of already talked about him earlier. It's only been 3 weeks, but he seemed to be putting up some decent numbers, right? 7 touchdowns to 1 interception. I mean, that's something I think almost any coach would take. He led that great comeback in the 4th quarter. Is he living? And I know you said that some people have had some far out takes on Jordan Love already. And, it's kind of like judging the whole season on 1 or 2 games. You don't want to do that, but what are you seeing out of Jordan Love, and what's kind of the general feeling from maybe the middle of the road, level-headed takes on him?
Well, football fans, there's not a lot of middle of the road level-headed takes. You're in the media game as much as I am. People go one way or the other. But I'd say let me talk about what the team feels like. They're very confident in the calm and cool presence that is Jordan Love. Kenny Clark said that he's got that California cool about him. Rasul Douglas just could only speak positive things about his quarterback, saying that, when Jordan Love is out there, we can win games. Preston Smith echoing the same thing. These are veterans on the defense who played with Aaron Rodgers as well. Rashawn Gary commented, hey, he had a couple years learning from a future Hall of Famer in Aaron Rodgers, and it shows. I think in this current quarterback landscape in the NFL, it's really hard to get 3 years of development and then know that you're going to be the guy. We're seeing that with Justin Fields right now, maybe Bryce Young adjusting to the college game, from the college game where you had a lot of success, to the NFL. Jordan Love was able to play and develop, and he might be young in total QB1 NFL snaps, but he's not young in age. He's not young in NFL experience living in the NFL. He's done it for 3 years, and I think it shows in just his composure, his ability to stay calm and confident. And the stats are following it. Not the most statistically impressive game against the Saints. He was 50%, 22 for 44, but leading the league after 2 weeks and then leading the Packers to a comeback, that's not too shabby.
Okay. And I know you talked about earlier, you mentioned it here, you mentioned it in our preview, that don't judge him after week 1, 2, or 3. Wait, because you think he and the team are going to get better as the season goes on, because the one thing that he really needs are live game reps, and same for the young receivers as well. Let's slide over to the defensive side, though. In our season preview, you talked about the defense having the talent last year, but not living up to expectations. So there have been some injuries, but in general, how has the group looked this year? Are they meeting some of that preseason hope? I mean, they shut down the Saints in the second half. They handled Chicago, and they lost a close one to Atlanta.
So one thing that I don't know if I said specifically preseason, but I would have been able to point out preseason. Packers are still struggling with their run defense. That's never been something that they've really shined at in the last 2 seasons. this season and all of last year while I've been covering the team. They've just struggled with the run defense. That was really shown in Atlanta. Atlanta just ran all over them with an obvious running attack. I mean, anyone could say that Atlanta's going to run the ball. And so even though a bevy of players have been able to sack the quarterback, Rashawn Gary gets 3 sacks against the Saints, they're still struggling with that run attack. One thing I found very interesting is players like Rasul Douglas said after the Saints game, there were a couple times where the Saints started employing offensive schemes that they'd seen the Falcons do the week before successfully, which means teams around the league are paying attention to see what the Packers are struggling at and trying to employ and use them against them. Rasul said they were able to shut the Saints down when they started noticing what they were doing against the Falcons. And then Joe Barry earlier on Monday said, hey, if you put something on tape negatively, other teams are going to see it. So you better be sure that you're better at it the next week. So they've acknowledged the fact that they've struggled with some things, obviously. Other teams have noticed. And now it comes to, hey, we've put that on tape. Are we going to do the same thing the next week? Because, are the Lions going to try to employ what the Falcons were able to do? Probably, because it was successful.
All right. Well, that leads us to the last part, which is any predictions for this game coming up. Now, it doesn't have to be who's going to win or lose. It doesn't have to be the score. It can just be anything that you think's going to happen or anything you want to predict. And it can be more than one thing.
I think that the Packers injury report before the game will have a lot of very recognizable names on it. I think if anyone's not on it, it's probably Aaron Jones. He has been doing individual drills at practice last week before the Saints, and he was limited, quote unquote, on Monday. So I'd think Aaron Jones would be a factor in this game if he's able to play, which I believe he will be. And I predict that the Packers special teams will not allow another touchdown. They won't go 2 games in a row to allow another touchdown, because that happened against the Saints. Really big momentum shift, just a bad look for a Rich Bisaccia squad that had been doing pretty well toward the end of last season to start this season. So I don't think they'll allow another special teams touchdown, especially 4 days after doing it.
Lauren, I appreciate your time, all your insight. I'm expecting a really good game. After the week 3 game, Lomas Brown even said about the Lions defense, this is not the same old Lions defense. And so I look forward to seeing how things play out Thursday night.
Yeah, I'll be on the sidelines before the game, kind of scoping out that injury report, seeing who's going to be lining up on both squads, because I think injuries will be a factor, especially on this short week. Definitely going to be exciting in this newest edition of the NFC North rivalry.
For sure. And you're right. Those injuries are going to be a big thing to keep an eye on. Thank you so much. And now, folks, for the rest of our Lions versus Packers preview, I'm joined by Coach Jerry Angers, named Michigan High School Coach of the Year, as well as Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He's also mentored numerous players to the college level and some all the way to the NFL. Good to have you here, Coach, for this quite quick turnaround.
Oh, great to be here. We didn't really get to bask in our victory yesterday. We got to turn around and get ready for the Packers, but that's good. That's what football is all about.
Exactly. And that point was even made by Coach Campbell, how they said they barely even looked at the Atlanta stuff. They're getting ready for Green Bay. Now, in our season preview, we talked all about the changes to the Green Bay Packers this offseason. If you want a more in-depth look at that, go back, check out episode 51. We detailed a lot of that right there. And as we get into it, just a reminder to the listeners, please hit the subscribe or the like button. It is helping us build momentum. So let's get to week 4. Both teams come in 2-1. The winner of the game will have a 1-game lead in the division and hold the early tiebreaker with the head-to-head win. Now, here's how Coach Campbell addressed it when he was asked about it.
Certainly you want these more because they're for the division, and these count. These have a significant impact on being a division winner. So I think in that regard, it certainly means a lot, but I think what we all just got to keep in mind is that really the way we played yesterday collectively is how we have to go in and play this game. It's going to take every one of us, and man, everybody's got to do their part, and it's never about one person. It's about everybody, coaches, players, and all three phases for us to win. You know, you got to fight for everything you get in this league. It's too hard to win when you don't. So we do that, then, you know, I like our chances out there.
So Coach Campbell didn't shy away from the importance of this game, even though it's just week 4. So Coach, what do you take away from all this?
Well, I think it's one of those things you have to, you know, it's a stepping stone, you know, what you're after. You know, people are favoring us to win the league. You don't want to start out, you know, 0-1 into the league. And plus it's an away game, which is, you know, winning on the road is always tough in your division. And so I think those are big things that he makes a point. Again, you know, the world has not ended if it doesn't turn out the way we plan, but it just gives you a foot up on the path that you're taking.
And, you know, the Lions are no stranger to tiebreaker scenarios. It was just last season that the tiebreaker things did us in. So I think he understands that and he's preaching that. But like you said, go back to what Coach Campbell said. It is a marathon, not a sprint. But there is a lot of importance in this game, especially as the way the division is looking early in the season. So let's talk about what we expect out of Green Bay coming into this game. Green Bay opened the season with a dominating win over Chicago. Then they lost to Atlanta the following week by just 1 point. Then they were down 17-0 last week to the Saints, and they came back scoring 18 points in the fourth quarter to win. So I'm expecting to see a motivated and encouraged Green Bay Packer team after that win.
Oh, no doubt. And did you know that was their largest fourth quarter deficit since 1950?
That's incredible.
Yeah, and you think about that. Think about all of you again. You know, they've been a great program forever, and they've never had to experience that. So Love's got something on Favre and Rodgers already.
Pretty quickly, too, for him. That's pretty great for a young start to a career. So I think that is going to something that carries over. You're not even looking at momentum carrying over from 1 year to the next or even a week later. It's 4 days later. You know the Packer team is going to be encouraged by that. I'm going to see them. I see them coming out motivated and encouraged. And I think it's a team that you're going to see they're not going to give up based on that fourth quarter comeback. The game is not going to be out of their reach, in their opinion, no matter what happens early on. So I think you're going to see a team that's there ready to fight, and it's not going to be an easy game.
No, I totally agree. And if you look at it, we've played 2 teams in a row that have come back from fourth quarter deficits. They played each other, the 2 teams last week. And that's going to be big for us. And what did we do? We kind of kept the pressure on and kind of kept it to a point to where that fourth quarter comeback couldn't happen. So, you know, I think our game plan is going to be the same. You know, keep grinding, keep pushing, keep fighting, you know, win in the mud, whatever you want to say, and try to get it to the fourth quarter, you know, where we can shut the door on them when they think they have an opportunity.
Excellent points. I think Green Bay is going to be looking to maybe establish some of that run if they can. You know, Aaron Jones has played 9 snaps all season. That was in game 1. There's a question whether he'll come back. We're going to talk about injuries. That's like the big storyline coming out of this or going into this. And if Aaron Jones is back, I think you're going to see him. I think you're going to see maybe a combination of him and A.J. Dillon. They want to try and get that running game going because that helps the quarterback out. Even without a strong running game, though, they've seen Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs. They've been quite active. I think they're going to continue to be active along with all the tight ends. So I think Jordan Love has looked good with those targets out there, and you see those young receiving threats contributing right away. They're going to if they can get the running game going, that's going to make them even that much more dangerous.
Oh, I agree with you. And you got to take in the factor, Matt, Coach Matt LaFleur is a pretty dang good coach. I mean, look at his record since he's been the head coach at Green Bay. And, he's smart enough to do what find out, get the best out of each one of his players. And how is he going to attack with those players? And again, his scheme on offense is going to exploit some of the things that they think they can beat Detroit on. And, they may go back and look at some of the Seattle stuff, try to look at some of the stuff that the Falcons could do or couldn't do. And he'll find it. But again, it's nice on a short week and maybe not with all of his weapons. But, we don't want to talk about that because that cost us in week 2 when when the injury bug, we're injured, they're injured. It's the NFL. You got to play with what's in there. 53-man rosters and a big practice squad that, you should be able to pull enough bodies up to succeed in your game plan. Plus, I'm going to throw one more in there. Matt LaFleur is from Midland and played quarterback at Saginaw Valley State University.
Yes, he has that Michigan connection, and I think there's a lot of people around here who have been rooting for him.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think you said something very important there. You talked about the fact that we're not going to consider injuries an advantage of any sort because we saw what happened with Seattle. I think if we switch over to what we expect out of the Lions, I think we're going to see a focused team. Now, I don't know what practice was like after that week 2 loss, but Coach Campbell said in his interview after that victory that he thanked his staff for putting up for him or putting up with him. So we have a feeling that things might have been dialed up that week.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. But again, now it's division. Now it's the Packers. I mean, there are so many storylines there. And, we can go back to last year. The Packers are going to use that from what happened to them last year against us with Aaron Rodgers. And so, now that they have Love, he has to write his own chapter. He wants to write his chapter by beating the Lions for the first time when he played them at home. And so it's going to be amped up. It's going to be amped up on a short week. So you're probably not going to have as much practice, but I think the intensity level, whether they're walkthroughs or film sessions, or the practices are going to be pretty amped up, and there's going to be a pretty good focus on both sides of the ball and special teams for both teams, I believe.
I agree with that completely. And I talked about the Packers having some confidence. I also expect the Lions to have more confidence coming into this game, especially the way the defense played against Seattle. I mean, what made those 7 sacks so impressive is that it was done by 6 different players. And we talked about the Packers wanting to maybe try and run the ball and establish a running game. The Lions probably have some pretty good pride in the amount of yards they've allowed rushing in each game. So in the Lions' eyes, they don't want to make that easy for the other team to do. You're going to see 2 very motivated, confident teams coming out here.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Green Bay at the big comeback, Green Bay at home. The Lions a big victory at home after, a stumbling block week 2. Your confidence level on both teams is going to be your young guys stepped up. And I read a couple things on some of the Packers young guys that have stepped up. So I think that's the biggest thing. And those guys are going to build on it. And going into Lambeau Field, I heard Coach Campbell say today, he already talked to the rookies about it's going to be loud, which we played at the Chiefs already this year. But he said, enjoy it. I think that's his words. Enjoy the experience of playing at Lambeau Field. It is a special place.
Almost made it, you and I. We almost did that trek week 17 last year. Just didn't work out, but one of these days we will make it there.
Oh, for sure. That's part of my bucket list.
So let's look at the major storylines or anything that might be unexpected from or by either team. We have to at least briefly talk about the big thing, which is the injuries. It's a big theme here. Both teams have more than their fair share, if there's even such a thing. The Packers have 10 players listed on their would-be injury report. The Lions have 9. Both teams had some players that are household names on the list as well, and some did not participate, and some were limited. And so that'll be interesting to see who does play. The Lions did show this past week that even with a very depleted secondary, these other players stepped up and performed really well. And so the injuries will have an impact, but I think you're going to see some players coming back for each team.
Yes, I see that. One of the things that from the Packer game that I read, they were talking about Zach Tom, the right tackle, his knee, and he didn't finish the game. And Coach LaFleur said that, that's a concern when a guy doesn't finish a game. So, and, you look at him, walk through, did not play, did not participate. They're all playing games too. They're never going to tip their hands, so they really, really have to. So there's a bunch of those different things go back and forth. Are they going to get in? Are they going to make it? Again, you have to identify what you believe the team is going to do with or without them, and make sure you can adjust during the game when they're in there, or if they do come back and get injured again. So that's part of the NFL. There's teams all over the league right now with these huge injury reports, which is kind of scary. I just don't ever remember that, but that could be social media too. That we never saw all these injuries before. Now all of a sudden guys are going into games with 8-9. I mean, the Cowboys didn't start 3 offensive linemen last night.
And it showed.
And it showed. I mean, that's just so, you got to play over it. And then, like, again, we keep saying the old next guy up, you're one play away from a starter. Well, everybody's got to do their job when they get that opportunity.
Well, and I think you even said it right there. This may have been a little bit of a chess match in the past few days with Green Bay and Detroit, both not overlooking their current opponents, but also knowing that this game, divisional game coming up on a short week, could impact these players. If you have a guy who could maybe go, maybe not go, maybe you give them the extra 4 days rest, knowing if they play on Sunday, they might not be available on Thursday. And so it'll be real interesting. I think both teams are going to get some key contributors back, and that will play a role. Another interesting storyline that could come out of this, we talked about that common opponent, right? The Lions beat Atlanta. The Packers lost to Atlanta. The Lions won at home against Atlanta. The Packers lost to Atlanta on the road. Many are going to talk about it, but you can't look at that and say, okay, the Lions are going to win because they did this and the Packers did that. I mean, just ask the Dallas Cowboys about that. Yeah, they had injuries, but the Cowboys beat the Giants beat Arizona, but Arizona beat the Cowboys. So the common opponent thing doesn't work, but I do think you could maybe learn something from Atlanta's success. I mean, they ran the ball well against Green Bay, and the question is, can Detroit do that? I mean, in the first 3 games, the Lions ran the ball for 118 yards, 102 yards, and then 115 yards, all on the ground. They hit the century mark. Can they do that again? I think if Taylor Decker can play, and you can move Sewell back to right tackle, and if David Montgomery's able to play, we might see the Lions really try to get that running game going, because that was a key at times last year. And so I think that's something we might see.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And going back to the common opponent thing, you're always going to look at that tape. Again, this is a short week, to where how much time did they spend on it. But you like to look at that because you just played against number 79 and number 79 played against number 62. And, those are things that guys look at. As a coach, I used to do it all the time too. I'd always go back and, for offense or defense and see what worked against them and what adjustments did they make the next week. So that did not work against them, so again, with a short week, but it sounds like Coach Campbell and his staff have jumped right into that, but again, they may have not looked at the Falcon game on how they played against them, but they may have looked at the Falcon game on how they played against the Packers.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm sure they probably already had guys scouting that or working that tape before the Lions even played. But you're exactly right. They're going to be looking at that tape and seeing what worked and what didn't work and try and steal some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And like you just said it about that. It's in the scouting report from last week. It's in that scouting report from last week. So that's the one nice thing for both teams, because they can pull it out. But at least the Lions have a week up on them because they had already looked at the Packer-Falcon game.
All right, well, now it's time to move into the predictions category. And again, we don't have to predict a win or a loss or a score. It could be anything you think that's going to happen in the game. And so my first thing is, I think injuries are going to play a role in this game for both sides. It's going to be important to keep an eye on this injury report when game day arrives. I mean, with so many players on that list right now, it is impossible to know who's going to play or not going to play. We do know that Matt Nelson is having surgery for the Lions. He was the backup tackle. He started in week 3. He's not going to be available. Again, keeping an eye on that list up until game day, because some of them will probably even be game time decisions. So I think that's one thing that is going to be a factor in this game.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. When things like that happen.
Another prediction I have is I think Jordan Love and the young offensive crew have looked good, but they've only got 3 weeks of reps together. They're still a young offense, a young group. I think they're going to continue to improve as the season progresses. But I do think if the Lions running game and the defense can both do what they need to, that could be the difference. Because I think we both agree the Lions passing game should take care of itself. That has been one of our consistent things throughout. And the defense really showed up last week. If they can show up even 90% of that, and then the running game improves just a little bit, it could be a really, really good game for the Lions.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think, we kind of established that on Sunday. And I think that's something that we're gonna go towards to try to establish that run a little bit more. I think with Knight, if Monty ends up coming back and gets some reps, that's going to make a big difference. And I think that's one of the things we're gonna establish the run first, and then come back at him with the pass play.
Awesome. Any other predictions or thoughts you wanted to share?
I just think the same thing is the team that withstands the injury bug the best is going to prevail and come out as a victor. I think the Lions are, their focal point is to be 1-0 this week. Again, their focal point is to be 1-0 in the league this week. Again, they want to come in and establish that they are going to start beating the Green Bay Packers at will. And I think so. That's one of the things. That's the prediction that I think you're going to see that's going to come out at them. I can predict. I think our special teams will win for sure. And then we just have to win one of the other two, if not both the other two, to come out 1-0 this week. I forgot about one thing too. There's they made a rotation change at their D tackle position. The Packers did last week. They've been playing two rookies, Carl Brooks and Wooden. Wooden had been starting. They changed and put Brooks over Wooden to start at D tackle because they were getting better play from him. The reason I brought this up is Carl Brooks is a Lansing guy. Carl Brooks went to Bowling Green State University, and I coached Carl Brooks in an all-star game. So Brooks, he's kind of kept in touch with him. I saw him down at the Senior Bowl. I wish him well. I'm so happy for him that he's making a splash. I'm just hoping that he stays healthy this week and doesn't make much of a splash.
I love that personal connection. I hope he has a great game and he plays well. Just also hoping we come out with a victory in the same process. I had this game in the should win category before the season started. After the Lions lost in week 2 and before Green Bay lost in week 2, I was like, I don't know the way Green Bay looked in week 1. Do I need to shift this? But I'm not shifting it. I'm keeping it in the should win category. Of course, you got to play the game because any game is winnable and losable. I mean, ask a half a dozen teams last week what happened, because it was a wacky week 3 in the NFL.
Oh, it sure was. I'm looking forward to Thursday night. That's for sure.
Awesome, Coach. Thank you so much for joining and sharing all the insights.
Oh, yeah. And anytime, Matt. Have a great night.
All right. Looking forward to Thursday. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. You can find all the episodes at notthesameoldlions.com. And if you have a question about the Lions, email me, Matthew at notthesameoldlions.com. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit that like button. And while you're at it, tell your friends about the show and please subscribe regardless of your listening platform. Until next time, stay gritty, my friends.